Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So we are continuing with the Mishnah 11 that we started yesterday. The statement by Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. So he's going to make a few statements, but this Mishnah is the first one, which talks about fear of sin, and that fear of sin precedes Chachma, precedes wisdom, and if wisdom is not preceded by fear of sin, then it will not endure. It will only endure if it's preceded by sin. I guess we could just put it up on the screen for just to show it for a second here, right? So we had Kol Shir Ascheto Kodemas L'Chachmaso, fear of his sin precedes his wisdom, then his wisdom will endure, and vice versa if it does not. So one of the things about fear of sin, first of all, is very famous line that we many times say it in the morning as well. Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is fear of God. So yirat chet, fear of sin, fear of God goes. It's a similar same idea that if you fear God, then you don't want to sin, right? So the beginning of wisdom is the fear of sin, and the idea that a person who is having in their mind that I want to make sure I do the right thing, that's going to affect all the things that you learn. Precedes Yisrael points out that a person in general, not just in the Torah, in terms of, let's say, learning any endeavor, learning science, etc., which we know there are, or philosophy, which you could end up getting into different thought processes and incorrect ideas. So he says a person should be concerned with fear of sin more so than worldly wisdom. In other words, if you know that there's something that's going to that if you study this without really having a strong Judaic background, a Torah background, you're going to end up getting caught up in some other philosophy. And why are you getting into it? What you need to do first is make sure that you have a strong background. So he says that if you do that, then that shows that you value those other chachmos, you value that other wisdom more so than your fear of sin, which is more important to you. So he says, therefore, it'll come out that a person who is thinks, oh, I will, I'm, it's no big deal for me to do this. Whether it could be in the era of wisdom, learning things that could be heretical, but also, truth of the matter is, same thing applies with doing certain activities or being in certain places, right? That you think, nothing will happen. So that means your fear of sin is not stronger than your wish to do whatever it is. That's what it means. So then that's your fault when you get in trouble. However, he says once a person is rooted in terms of the Torah and fear of sin, then he says you would be permitted to study those other things specifically, not just maybe in general, but also because it's important to know in order to be able to respond to people who question, right? We said to have a person needs to know what to say to an apikoros, to a heretic. You need to know what to respond. So there is an importance in learning other philosophies, etc., or maybe even to some degree about other religions, in order to be able to know what they're talking about to counteract it. But in order to do that, you have to have a strong knowledge of Torah, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to do it, and all you're going to do is end up getting yourself in trouble. That's the Tiferes Yisrael. Rabbi Twersky actually has a very interesting point, which is that there's a correlation between wisdom and fear of sin. And it says, the more you know, or the more learned you are, so then the greater should your fear of sin should be. The greater a person is, the greater their fear of sin should be. He quotes I think from the Gemara that, or maybe it wasn't a Gemara, I think it was maybe a story later, but a certain Rabbi Elimelech was castigating himself. He was saying, I'm doing this wrong, I'm doing that wrong. And one of his students said to him, "What do you mean? He's such a great tzaddik. He's such a great person. Well, why is he calling himself a sinner? Why is he referring to himself in a negative way?" So he responded to him with a parable. He said there was a king who wanted to redesign his palace. And he also wanted to fix up all his things and make everything beautiful. So there was a laborer who was in construction, one of the guys working in the construction, who was he had broiges, as we say. He was upset with the king. He held a grudge. So he was digging the foundation. He dug it out of line. He didn't put it, he made it offline. He made it like 10 meters out of line. And then when they found out that he had done that, they whipped him and they made him fill the ditch. There was a jeweler who was assigned to prepare a diamond for the crown, for the royal crown. And he wasn't paying attention, and he just did a very sloppy job because he couldn't care less. And he cut the diamond just a little millimeter off, just a little bit. And he was given a very lengthy prison sentence. He said, how come this guy he got off relatively light? Yeah, okay, he got whipped, but basically the other guy was put in jail for years. Why? Because that small error of being a little bit off on that diamond is a lot more the consequences and the value is a lot more than the being a little bit off on the line in the construction. And the idea is, he says that the greater you are, the greater responsibility that you have. And therefore, your error makes a big difference. A small error from a person who's in a position, in a special position, that's going to make a bigger difference. You're going to affect, first of all, you're going to affect more people. More people are influenced by what you do and what you say. And therefore, you're more accountable. And we see this in the Torah all the time, right? In the Torah, we find that when we learn Torah, we say, oh, this Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, whatever, we find they did certain things wrong. And we're always explaining when we're going into depth, say, that this was that mistake, this was the mistake, and it's not such a big mistake. But the Torah sort of blows it up and makes it like, wow, look what they did. And the idea is because for them, it was a huge sin, even though if we would have done that, big deal, so whatever it might have been. We hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock, not such a big deal. But for Moshe to do that, that's a much bigger deal, and therefore he's held accountable and to a higher degree. And the Torah and the Navi, and when we read stories in the Navi as well, the sin itself really is usually not as big as the Torah is making it out to be, but it's trying to highlight for that person, it is on that level. If someone else who not as great would have done it, it doesn't make a difference. So there's a correlation, therefore, between the idea of the wisdom. The more we know, the more responsibility we have, which is something for us to bear with it. And just finally, one other idea, or maybe along the same lines, is that the idea of having this fear of sin is having this, or in a sense, a moral compass, is so essential, because wisdom or intellectual, right? We are, as human beings, we have the ability to basically come up with all kinds of ideas and thoughts and explanations and rationalizations for pretty much anything in the world. We can make black white, and we can make white black, and we can twist, basically to make something, murder into a mitzvah. Right? We can do all kinds of things. And that's what the human being has a capacity for. And if we don't start with a certain moral compass, then we end up our intellectual wisdom and all our thinking is able to twist things around. So we have to be able to start. We start with that fear of sin. We start with that understanding there's a right and wrong. And when we understand that there's a right and wrong, then it's going to temper our ability to start playing with the values and the morality, because we realize that we're not making that judgment. That judgment, we have already come in understanding that this type of thing is wrong. Now we are going to maybe figure out how to work with it, but we're not going to start explaining to ourselves why that is not the way to do things, and we're going to come up with another way that's going to make us happy at this moment, which is basically going to go against what God's will is. And therefore, the fear of sin precedes wisdom, in the sense that if we have that understanding before we start that this is right and that is wrong, then our wisdom will not overcome basically our emotions, and that's really the goal. So we'll hold it there for today. Have a great day, everyone.